If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it.
In just a few weeks, playoff basketball returns at Madison Square Garden. The Knicks notched their 46th win of the season on Sunday to earn a postseason spot with 2.5 game lead on the Brooklyn Nets. The magic number for the Knicks, as Tommy just mentioned, is just 1 game. The Knicks win or a Nets loss, and the Knicks secure the number 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. Already secured play spot. 5 seed will be clinched with just 1 win, whether it be a Knicks win or a Nets loss. So under the leadership of Leon Rose and Tom Thibodeau as the head coach, this is the second time in 3 seasons that the Knicks have qualified for the playoffs. The team missed the postseason in each of the previous 7 seasons before Leon Rose took over. So, Tommy, a little bit more of a macro conversation here as the Knicks clinch a playoff spot. Is the season now already a success with the Knicks headed to the postseason?
No. I mean,
interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, definitely not. Like, again, 2012, 2013, Knicks win 54 games. We out of nowhere, the We Here Knicks team advanced, beat the Celtics in the first round, advanced to the second round, lose to a very good Pacers team. Listen, it's cool. Start of the future, Mike Woodson, Melo, like everything's going in the right direction. Knicks win 37 games the next year. Yep. Thibodeau's first season, 10 games over 500, 4 seed, home court advantage in the playoffs. This is the start of something they're building. Knicks win 37 games the next year. Long story short, next season is not promised. Randall, a monster season this year. Does he regress? Does he somehow stay on that same plateau? We'll see. Brunson, I don't know. It's not possible he could play any better, right? Does he get injured? Grimes and Quickly, do they continue to play at the level they continue on their upward trajectory? The answer right now on April 3rd, when they're 13 games over 500 and everything seems to be going right, absolutely. That being said, and again, the Knicks, the beauty of the season is the Knicks are ahead of schedule. The goal was to kind of maintain status quo and while also building towards the future. Knicks are not only building, keeping their reservoir of draft picks and draft capital and young assets. All those young assets have improved their value by playing as well as they have, which makes the team a very tough out right now. So I say all that to say, next season's not promised. The future's not promised. The Knicks team as currently constructed has the ability to beat this Cleveland Cavs team in the first round of playoffs. So I think just, advancing to the postseason is not giving justice to just how good Jalen Brunson has been this season, to just as well as Randall's played this season, to just the complete two-way player that Quentin Grimes, although he's just 22 and in his second year of the NBA, has been these last 2 weeks. That IQ in his third NBA season is pacing 6th year. There's no guarantee that Mitch is healthy next year and Hartenstein, etc. So you have an opportunity. There's opportunities in front of you. You need to take advantage of it. If they lose a tough 7-game series to Cleveland, does that mean that the season's an utter disaster? And of course not. But that being said, like to address your question directly, is this Knicks season a success just because they advanced the playoffs? My answer would be no.
Interesting. I did not expect you to go there, to be honest. I don't want to be a cop-out here, but I think when I say it's a success or not, so I'm kind of copping out my own question. I think it does depend on like what happens in the first round. So my thing is like, okay, the way I kind of view the question is, if Knicks lose in the first round of the playoffs, does that like not matter? Does that mean the season is a success? I'd say, well, I think it depends on what happens. Now, coming into the season, I did not expect the Knicks to win a round in the playoffs. I thought that the Knicks making the playoffs was going to be a tall order. I thought that they could do it, but if they did, they'd probably be the 7th or 8th seed, having got in via the play-in tournament. So now that they're here, we've seen the season. I don't want to lose sight of what the expectations were and how these guys have improved pretty much tenfold, almost the entire roster. But I think because of what we saw in that Atlanta series 2 years ago, and because we saw a Knicks team that we thought should have been able to be much more competitive and maybe win in the first round, just get stomped by the Atlanta Hawks, it kind of makes you feel like, man, you can't go through that again. Like to have, that happen, then have the miserable 2021-2022 season happen, and then just get right back to just getting stomped in the first round. It'd be hard to try to spin that as some kind of success. Now, I think maybe you could still say, hey, listen, at least now this team You actually have a point guard, something you didn't have before. Now this season, you have a guy who you can build around, a cornerstone. At least now you kind of know more of what your young players can be, as opposed to like even 2 years ago, where like Quickly and Obi are rookies and RJ's a second year player, and you're still kind of unsure. Now you at least have a better idea. I think you can still spin it and say, hey, at least now you know more of who you are. But it would be tough if they had that. Now, if they lose in the first round, a tough 6 or tough 7-game series, I can't say that that's not a successful season. Like I can't. Like to me, like that meant that a team that a lot of people did not think to make the playoffs would have made the playoffs, compete against a team that at parts of the season looked like they were a title contender and took them to 6 or 7 games. And if they lose a heartbreaker in Cleveland or they lose a game 6 at Madison Square Garden, I would say, all right, tough pill to swallow. This is a team I think they could have beat. But at the end of the day, they do have a guy who is a superstar, or at least on the precipice of being a superstar. In the Knicks, we don't think have that guy yet. So I would say, long answer, I would say yes, I think it is a success, barring there isn't a playoff disaster, which I don't expect. Now, I didn't expect what happened 2 years ago, but I would be surprised if the Knicks got swept or lost in 5 games to Cleveland. That would honestly shock me.
Agreed. And yeah, it is important to note, I certainly I didn't predict the Knicks to win 46 plus games this season. So if you would have asked me, prior to the season, if making the playoffs would have been a success, I would have said yes. Even if you asked me in one of our podcasts on a Tuesday afternoon in July, when we're looking at free agency, was the last season a success, even if the Knicks, lose in 5 games or 6 games, I will say yes. I'm just, I just think, as we've talked about in previous pods, like you recalibrate your expectations based on how the season's gone. So that's just kind of my point. Just looking ahead, the Knicks have a really good opportunity opponent, and just the storylines and the health of the team is relatively healthy, assuming Randall can come back and play in the postseason as well. Like these opportunities, the stars aligned this year. So you really want to take advantage of. It was kind of my overarching theme.
Yeah, no, and I totally get that. And when it comes to the Knicks, ceiling or what we expect, I mean, nobody that I don't think thinks their ceiling is making it to the NBA Finals. So to me, people will parse over. I've said conference finals. I know you said mostly second round. Other people I talked to have said second round. Some people have said conference finals. How do the Knicks get beyond that level? Like, regardless of whether it's 1 round or 2 rounds, like, what is the next step to the Knicks saying, hey, like, we're not just a team that could win a round or 2. We can get to championship, or at least make it to the finals if we don't win an NBA championship. Like, the way I look at this team, and I've said it, on WFAN hosting, sometimes, and maybe I'm crazy, but part of me just feels like it might just be just time. And I'm not, I do think it's very important to not think that, like, if you just kind of stand pat, that things will just end up working out for you in the end, because oftentimes it doesn't. You got to be aggressive and, be aggressive in reshaping your roster and continuing to evolve your roster. But I look at the Milwaukee Bucks. I see an aging roster, a dominant team, but an aging roster. I see Philly, and I see some flux. They have, star players, but I see Harden kind of, getting up there in age. I see some guys going to be coming up on contracts, a guy they're going to have to move. I see a coach who I don't know how much longer he's going to be there. And I say, how long are they contenders? I expect the Boston Celtics to be contenders as long as they got Tatum and Brown. And I expect Cleveland to be around and be one of the top teams in the East. But it just feels like in 2 or 3 years, the Heat they're not going to be anywhere near this picture, and barring some crazy free agent signing, which could happen. We've seen that in Miami, obviously, before. But it just feels like there's a vacuum that's being created in the East, where some of these teams that we just think are going to contend forever won't. And I kind of wonder if the Knicks, they continue to build the right way. Maybe they get another star in here. Then in 2 years, we're not talking about the Knicks competing for a championship, competing to be one of the title contenders. Like, do you see that the same way, or do you feel like it's going to take something a little more desperate or a little more extreme for them to get to that point?
No, I agree with you for the most part. You talk about Milwaukee. Yes, they're aging roster, but Giannis is still in the heart of his prime, and Holiday's a little bit older, but still has a couple of years left. So I'll putting them aside for a moment, because assuming Giannis stays in the East and stays in Milwaukee, I think the Bucks are going to win the championship this year. I think they'll be the favorites heading into next season. But putting them outside of that. Philly, Harden's going to be a free agent this year.
Yeah.
He's been good this season, led the league in assists. So I'm not going to say he's played poorly, but I don't think it's quite lived up to expectations that Sixers fans had hoped. Looks a step slow defensively. are talking about the team's better when Maxi's, kind of running the show and games that Harden's missed. And again, Harden's going to be a free agent this summer and it's talked about going back to Houston already.
Yep.
So is he committed to Philly? I don't know. I would short the Sixers stock if I could. Celtics, you assume good young coach, Tatum, top 5 MVP candidate, and they keep, Brown and Tatum together. Question is, are they going to keep Brown and Tatum together? Everything you read about, leaking out of Boston is Brown's unhappy, the city and the franchise. They dangled him in the KD talks. He's a year and a half away from free agency. How does that play out? Do they trade him instead of losing him in free agency? Does he go back home to California? All those things are up in the air. The Heat, the Hawks, who knows? The Heat will, the Hawks, a year ago, you would have said they're in a position to be a top 3 team. We've seen them take a huge step back. Maybe Quinn Snyder gets them back on track. Heat will try to rebuild, but I think that you can make an argument, if you're looking 3 years ahead, that the 2 best teams in the conference, depending on what happens with Giannis, will be the Cavs and the Knicks, which is another reason it makes the season so interesting. The upcoming series, so interesting with the Donovan Mitchell. And one other thing we'll talk about with the new collective bargaining agreement is the fact that you can have more than 2 rookie max contracts on the same deal, which for the Cavs is important because they have Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and now they're going to have to re-up Mobley at that max number. So they've benefited from one of the tweaks to the collective bargaining agreement. All that being said, let's hope that the Knicks are in that conversation in a few years. And so to directly answer your question, what the Knicks will have to do, first and foremost, is they have to that ascension assumes that the players will continue on their current trajectory. Quentin Grimes, who's played terrifically these last 2 weeks, continues to get better. We've seen him kind of dip up and down over the last few months. He's gone into slumps and not had quite the impact as he continued to get better and better and better. Does Emmanuel quickly continue to play at this same level, a 6-man caliber talent? Does Jalen Brunson, is it possible that he plays as well next season as he does this year? I would argue yes. The beauty of Brunson contract as we look at it now is it's actually descending in value, which incredibly means that he's going to be paid less next year than this year. Also, even though he's also in the harvest prime, and he's even a guy that's 31 years old. He's never been a player at age 25, 26, what he is now. He's not relying on quickness or speed or Russell Westbrook athleticism. He outthinks you and footwork and outmaneuvers you and gets you off balance and scores on you. So he's a player that, unlike many point guards we've seen in the NBA, he has more of the Chris Paul trajectory than a Russell Westbrook kind of player. But again, it's all, does Mitch Rob stay healthy? Again, all the question marks that we had coming into the season, because all those boxes were checked this year, doesn't guarantee that they'll be checked next year. As we've talked about with the We Here team and the Randall, number 4 seed year team. In terms of roster construction, I think I don't want to call it an extreme move, but if there was one big move that would bump the Knicks up a tier that I think will be very seriously explored this offseason, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about it after this season ends, is what to do with RJ Barrett. I think the quickest way to leap in terms of relevance and competitiveness and legitimacy as a title contender is to turn Barrett and some draft capital into an upgraded piece at 3, a 3-and-D wing, an OG Anunoby, depending on your feelings on him, a Mikal Bridges type player. They're not going to get Bridges, who's been a wonderful addition.
Been a star in Brooklyn.
A star in Brooklyn. That type of player where he's maybe an underappreciated tertiary piece on a title contending team like the Suns. You bring him to New York and give him a bigger role alongside Randall, alongside Brunson. And I didn't even mention Randall piece. We saw him go all NBA to the least efficient player in the NBA to all NBA. What happens next season? Again, all these questions are up in the air. So it's hard to commit hardcore to the Knicks are here and they're here for good. There's certainly reasons to believe that's the case, but there are reasons to be pessimistic as well. In order to kind of cushion that fall, you would assume, these guys coming back down to earth a little bit is upgrading that small forward position, because RJ Barrett, while he's had his moments and still has an opportunity to prove himself in a playoff series, the most important series of his career to date, I at this moment feel, and I have felt for this season, that he's been holding them back in certain respects. He's been an inefficient, he hasn't been a net positive this season. So if you could get somebody that's that's a significant net positive, most especially on the defensive end, because again, the Knicks are a top 5 offense with Barrett struggling immensely on the offensive end this season for large chunks of the season, even though he scored 20 points, high usage player, low true shooting percentage, not an ideal combination. If you get one of those 3-and-D guys that can kind of, that's a perfect fit in between Brunson and Randall. And now you have 3-and-D wing, Grimes alongside Brunson, Randall, Mitch Robinson. That's a really strong starting 5, assuming they re-sign Josh Hart. Then you have arguably the best bench in basketball with IQ, Hartenstein, and Hart all signed for at least one more season. There's a lot to like there.
Yeah, there's several options they can do. You mentioned Julius Randle, and his value is, now hopefully it doesn't tank with a poor playoff performance, but his value is also sky high. Like, does he get moved for a guy who's a star? Because I almost feel like the Knicks could be in that Raptors pre-Kawhi situation where they may need to take one of these guys that they currently have. They need to upgrade this position. And whether it be, I'm looking at either RJ, looking at Randall, even looking at Mitchell Robinson, compared to what happens with some of these centers. I mentioned Joel Embiid before. Something about that situation, I always wonder how long he'll be there, especially if they have another postseason flop. Those 3 positions, the key positions, I can look at and saying, if they trade one of these guys and they turn that into an upgraded piece, maybe even a superstar, I think the Knicks, now you're talking about, they're a true title contender. I really think that move will happen sooner than we think. Like, I think that move could happen this summer.
I definitely think that move could happen this summer, but now, because of the past 6 months, most specifically the last 3 months, 4 months, the Knicks are in a position now where last summer it was trade for a superstar, get any superstar, try to get relevant. Now the Knicks can be picky. Now they shouldn't trade for a Zach LaVine.
Yes, they cannot trade for Zach LaVine.
You know what I'm saying? Like that type of player. In other words, if Karl-Anthony Towns was available last summer, yeah, let's get him. We'll figure it out later. Now, is Karl-Anthony Towns an upgrade over Randall? If you give up Robinson and Randall, or some combination thereof, does it make sense? The Knicks can get a little bit, can pick and choose their right star. So that's why I say it's not necessarily the first superstar that's up for grabs, which isn't something the Knicks have had the luxury of even discussing in years past. Now they can try to find the right piece, and that right piece may not be the guy that's, the 25-point scorer, but a guy that's averaged 17 and 2 steals and shoots, 43% from 3.
I know one thing. This is going to be a very interesting couple of years coming up for the Knicks. I don't think that this is a flash in the pan this season. I think that the Knicks are entering a era where they'll be a perennial playoff team, and the moves they make now are going to be so important, because they could be the difference between whether or not they can truly contend for a title, or if they're the Joe Johnson Atlanta Hawks and their team that's just in the playoffs, and maybe one year they do really well in the regular season, but a team that can't seriously win a title. I think that is going to be very important to watch over the next couple of seasons. But the Knicks are in the postseason, so rejoice, be happy. It should be a fun time in April here, watching Knicks basketball in the postseason. But let's wrap the show quickly talking about
100%. Just one quick thing, and then we'll get the CBA stuff.
Yeah.
The other thing about the guys playing good, IQ and Grimes, now you got to pay them like the guys that play good. So all that stuff gets factored in. Do you make your move while you still have cap space to spend? Because you're going to have to ink IQ to a big contract this summer, and then Grimes is going to be up, and then you got to decide what to do with Obi. So just one other thing. Thankfully, we'll have months to discuss that this offseason.
Yeah.
Now we need to focus on the playoffs.
Yeah, it's going to be very important. I saw Jake Fisher say that he doesn't think IQ will sign an extension this offseason just because of how well he's playing. And, I couldn't blame him if that was the case. Yep. So, yes, definitely very important to see what the Knicks do moving forward. But let's move